Welcome everyone. I am Dr. Lenny Liebenberg, and this is the Tuesday session of the Doctoral Academy, our PhD support group meeting. Of course, as usual, I'm very happy to be here, and I am really glad to see you too, both newcomers, many newcomers and regulars. So thank you very much for joining this very special meeting today. For the newcomers, the PhD support group meetings are very informal and they present a holistic approach to enhancing our professional development. So even though we ask you to please mute during the presentation, and we also prefer to have your cameras switched off during the presentation, it doesn't mean that you should not interact. We very much encourage interaction during these sessions. So please feel free to engage in this very supportive environment that's aimed at uplifting our community. You can place any comments or questions in the chat box and use your reaction icons, your emoticons, whenever you feel like expressing your emotions and thoughts about the presentation and the content and the discussion. Okay, so the housekeeping out of the way. Let me just do one last check just to make sure that everybody knows where the reaction icons are. Please lift your thumb up, give me a thumbs up, give me a thumbs down in the reaction icons if you've ever felt, maybe now, maybe sometime in your past, that you really are not as intelligent or as accomplished or as competent as people seem to believe that you are. Despite your education or despite your experiences or your qualifications to be where you are. Okay, somebody knows where the reaction icons are. How about a different question then? Just give me a thumbs up or thumbs down if you ever felt that you actually do not deserve to be where you are right now. You do not deserve your successes, or you do not deserve your accomplishments, that there's someone or everybody better out there than you deserving to be where you are, that it's only a matter of time for someone is going to find out that you're a fraud and you're undeserving and you do not deserve to be there. Okay, I'm going to stop there now. People know where the reaction icons are, and it seems that we are not alone. It happens to almost everyone, and I can guarantee that your professors, your supervisors, your colleagues, your friends have experienced a case of imposter syndrome at one time in their careers. And it's something that's just so common and needs to be managed, or else we're very likely to miss opportunities for growth and progress. So today is a very special session. We have with us Dr. Juan Jansman-Feren, who is a medical doctor at Gray's Hospital and a PhD student of neurology at UKZN. And he will be speaking with us today about his journey and how to manage this dreaded imposter syndrome. So welcome, and thank you so much for taking your time out of your day. I look forward to the presentation and the discussion to follow.
Thanks so much. Yeah, so I see a lot of people saying that they've experienced this. So I've done a talk on this before, also for the Doctoral Academy, and I'm going to sort of touch on some of the things that we've spoken about before, but I'm going to focus really on management and identifying it. And again, just a small caveat, as I was doing this presentation to try and come up with definitions or examples, I didn't have to look particularly far, just had to look in the mirror, really. And I think it is so common and so prevalent. So this is such an important topic, I think, and I thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to chat about it. So if everybody's ready, I'm going to get going with the presentation. Yep, you guys can ask questions, or we can keep the questions for later. You can ask throughout, just let me know. So before we start, let's change the term imposter syndrome and use the term imposter phenomenon. I think this takes away the whole clinical aspect of it, and it makes it potentially less stigma-driven if we call it imposter phenomenon. So just a quick overview of where we're going to go with the talk. So as I said, we're going to touch on some of the definitions. We're going to go through a couple of examples, and then I'm going to give my 10 steps in managing imposter syndrome / phenomenon. So just a quick thing, an alternate spelling for imposter is impostor, just so that that's out of the way. A quick definition. So what is an imposter? It's somebody who pretends to be someone else or who deceives others, actively trying to mislead people, or one that assumes a false identity, somebody who they're not really. A couple of synonyms: fake, fraud, pretender, potentially a sham, a phony, a charlatan. If anybody's watched the movie Catch Me If You Can, that was a clear example of an imposter. So again, we've spoken about some of the synonyms for imposter syndrome. The one that I prefer is imposter phenomenon. Again, it takes away that whole clinical aspect of it and makes it more common. Fraud syndrome, perceived fraudulence, and imposter experience. The last one I think is also quite important because this is an experience more than anything else. So it was first described by a couple of psychologists way back in 1978. And I say way back in 1978 because it makes me feel younger to say it that way. It gained popularity when one of these psychologists, Clance, when she wrote a book called The Imposter Phenomenon, When Success Makes You Feel Like a Fake. And we're going to come back to Clance a little bit later. For us to go forward, I thought it might be worth just having a look at a working definition for what imposter phenomenon is. And this is from a paper published in 2020. It's high-achieving individuals who, despite their objective successes, so where we are now, fail to internalize these accomplishments. And there's this persistent self-doubt and fear of being exposed as a fraud or an imposter. So try and keep that in mind as we go through the management of the imposter phenomenon. The key thing here is to identify the key word, which is managing the imposter phenomenon. It's not curing the imposter phenomenon. And this is an ongoing process where we have to continually assess and reassess ourselves and manage in different ways the same presentation of this imposter phenomenon. So I've adapted these 10 steps from work done by Dr. Young, who's a leading expert on imposter syndrome or imposter phenomenon. And there's a website, impostersyndrome.com, which has a couple of additional resources that one can access. Just to give credit where credit is due, this is Dr. Young, and it's a very short biographical, but essentially she co-founded the Imposter Syndrome Institute, and she's done numbers of talks across the world on radio, for example, on BBC, and she's won multiple awards. And she's a really uplifting individual to study if you have time. So here are my 10 steps, and we're going to go through each of them. And again, if there are any questions, feel free to ask. I'm not going to go through all of them now. We'll go through them one by one. So step one, we need to know the signs. And identifying the problem is the first step. Now, Clance, who described it in 1978 with her colleague, proposed an imposter phenomenon scale. And it is actually an online questionnaire, which I can't reproduce here, unfortunately, due to copyright. But what I've done is I've taken each of the questions and annotated it as, or called it a sign that we need to look out for, or highlighted the main points. And the website that you can find it on is paulineroseclans.com. So the first sign, success despite fear. So the first question in this questionnaire, it touches on our real world successes. And it asks whether prior to achieving or prior to performing a task or undergoing a test, are we dominated by a fear of failure? And that's really the overarching description from this first question. And what's key here to identify in ourselves, again, as part of trying to anticipate the management, is it highlights the anticipation of failure rather than highlighting the failure itself. The second sign, or the great imitator, the ability, it assesses the next question, or the next sign is to assess our ability that we come across more competent than our true abilities may reflect if it were tested properly. And this is really key to the imposter phenomenon, where it highlights our feelings of deceit. So this is something to look out for and to highlight in ourselves and say, right, I actually do feel quite concerned that I'm going to come across more competent in giving a talk about imposter phenomenon than I actually am. The third sign to keep an eye out for is the duck and dive sign. So this assesses our willingness to be assessed, or our readiness. And this ties in with the first sign, where it highlights our fear of failing. And we need to ask ourselves, do we avoid being assessed? Do we leave it until the last minute for an assessment to be done? It also highlights the fear of being caught out, because if we're assessed, are we going to be outed as a fraud in our respective field? And this often leads to us avoiding doing tasks or leaving it to the last minute, procrastinating. Then when the task is done, we feel that it's probably not as well done as it should have been. And if you then get praised for the task, it feeds into this whole feeling of fraud, or this fraudulent feeling. The next sign, or sign number 4, is the pedestal sign. So this really, we need to look at how we react and identify how we react to praise. Are we afraid that we are not living up to expectations of those close to us, especially? And are we scared of receiving praise because of a fear that we are going to be assessed even closer? So that's another important sign to look out for in identifying the problem. Sign number 5 is the luck of the Irish. So how do we perceive our successes? We were just at the right place at the right time. Was this all complete luck that we are where we are today? And this highlights our inability to often accept the success for what it is, success. And rather we downplay it a lot. Feelings of this, the fact that we are successful, or that we have attained some sort of success, was some sort of error. It was a mistake, and somebody's bound to find out. Sign number 6, I call close to home. And this is a fear of being found out by those close to us emotionally, that we aren't who we are in the academic field or in our professional field. And this may manifest itself as not being able to accept praise from those close to us, perhaps not being assessed or showing ourselves to those close to us. And this fear of not living up to expectations can be crippling. And that's another sign just to keep an eye out for. Selective amnesia, I think, is something that comes quite naturally to a lot of academics. We remember the events that didn't go well. We focus on all the questions in the exam that we know we got wrong. We think about that failure or that spelling mistake or that fumble in a presentation, rather than focusing on what truly happened and the true outcome thereof. I think there's a tendency then to focus on the negative aspect rather than focusing on the win. And this feeds into this belief of inferiority. The next thing to keep an eye out for is difficulty in accepting compliments or praise. When somebody says, well done, you did so well, you really were the best in this task. And you say, well, no, you were really what kept us all together, or you were the one that pulled us through. And there's often a deflection with an element of self-deprecation. And this is quite dangerous, because when we deflect and say, well, you know what, it actually wasn't that great, or what I achieved really, anybody could have done that. That's a dangerous cycle to get into. Although we enjoy hearing compliments of praise, enjoyment is often fleeting, because shortly after you think, well, was I really that great? Should I have come out and said, well, I wasn't that great? So it's a very tricky situation to be in. This is of particular importance, I think, again, in the academic world. Disappointment in our accomplishments. It might sound a bit strange, but where we feel we should have done more by now, or we should have achieved more, we should have published more, we should have gotten that grant, where we compare ourselves with those around us who are potentially in a completely different situation to where we are. But we feel the need that, or we feel that enough simply is not enough. And that's another sign to look out for. Or we may feel that when we are successful, it can't be repeated. It was a once-off, luck of the Irish, sort of, it's not going to happen again. I'm just not good enough to do that again. And it ties in with those feelings of where I just got lucky. This ties in with what we said earlier, where we might acknowledge praise, but we underplay the significance or the importance. For example, being registered for any degree or any course during the period of a pandemic. You might say, well, yeah, it's not really that great. Thank you so much. But, anybody could have done it. But anybody couldn't have done it. It's not that anybody could have done it. You've done it. And we need to accept that. But this is a really important sign. And what ends up happening is we feed into the self-deprecation monster. And we put ourselves down in the face of praise and in the face of congratulations. This is something that I'm quite cognizant of, is where there are feelings that one doesn't want to share the good news, like promotion or success or the publication of a paper or the acceptance of an article, until it's finalized, until it's really, really, really done. No takebacks. And the reason for this is there's this underlying feeling that somebody might realize that all along it was a mistake and I shouldn't really have gotten the promotion, or the paper shouldn't have been published, and they'll withdraw it. And it'll be taken away. And this may lead to embarrassment. And there's this fear of embarrassment. Okay, so those were 12 of the common signs or the common things that came out of the questionnaire that Clarence proposed. Now, it's all Likert type questionnaire questions where you answer, agree as 5 and disagree as 1, for example, and it gives you a score. And at the end of it, it tells you that the severity, and I put that in quotation marks, but how does it affect your day-to-day living? It may not affect your day-to-day living physically with your family and at work, but emotionally and in the work that you put in after hours, it might have detrimental effects. So it's really important that step one, knowing the signs and identifying these signs, it's really, really important that we accept that and that we focus on that. The second in the 10 steps is to be aware and to talk about it. So we're not alone in any of this. The prevalence of imposter phenomenon ranges. It depends on the setting and it depends on the study, but certainly up to 82% of academic settings, individuals have described or reported imposter phenomenon feelings, which is incredible. So it's important to confide in somebody regarding our experiences. And I know this might sound very airy-fairy, you know, sort of, yeah, we know we should do that, but how do we practically do that? It might be subtle in saying to somebody, look, I'm struggling to go through with my work because I don't feel like I'm good enough. Some people might say, well, you're fishing for compliments, but that's not quite it. I think it's okay to require validation sometimes. I think it's okay to need to hear that, you know what, you are good enough. You are in this program. You are good enough in the setting that you are. So finding somebody in whom you can confide is really important. Now, literature has shown that mindfulness exercises and meditation may play quite a significant role. I know there are loads of apps around it, but this ties into the first step of knowing the signs and being aware and cognizant of the fact that these are actually happening, or this is actually happening in your life. And being able to meditate on that, or to be mindful of that. I'm no expert on this whatsoever, but the literature has shown great promise in that. Seeking professional help is incredibly important as well. Again, that scale sort of gives you an idea of how crippling it may be from a day-to-day setting, or in a day-to-day setting. But seeking professional help to assist with cognitive behavior therapy, for example, has proven good outcomes. But is this imposter phenomenon potentially part of something else? Generalized anxiety disorder, perhaps a missed major depressive disorder, or some other mood disorder. So therefore, it's really important to identify this early on and then seek this help and assistance from those who may be able to carry the burden for us and look from the outside and with an objective eye to rule these things out. Right, step number 3, stand out. Now, this quote is attributed to Confucius. So if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. Yes and no. Insofar as you need to be in a room where you will be stimulated and where you can learn from people. You need to surround yourself with people that you can look up to, that can teach you in different ways. But I disagree here, because sometimes it just will happen that in that room, you are the smartest person. And it will simply be the case, either because it's at a conference, perhaps you're giving a lecture. But it's okay to accept that and take that chance to stand out. Make it a cognitive decision, an active decision to stand out in that situation. And you may often not realize your potential to inspire those around you. because there probably is somebody in that room having similar issues or similar struggles and similar hurdles to you. And they see it and they think to themselves, well, they can do it. And then that inspiration will continue to ignite and it will pay itself forward. Step number 4 is taking advantage. So the imposter phenomenon is very much associated with perfectionism, the old so-called type A personalities. And again, that's why it ties in with the anxiety and why it's important to seek help early on. But published work actually suggests that there may be an upside to this when used correctly. People who show loads of features to suggest imposter phenomenon have improved interpersonal skills and significantly higher empathy. And this has been shown to have a potential for a greater, more meaningful output in their work. But again, this is provided that the effects of the imposter phenomenon are not pathological and that it is not affecting your day-to-day. So we need to learn to take advantage of this and manage it. Again, as I said at the beginning, the aim is not to cure imposter phenomenon, but it's to manage it. So let's tame the beast and put it into our work, if we can do so safely and with the help of others. Step number 5 is reacting to failure. Right, so this is a big one, because failure, unfortunately, it occurs in science, it occurs frequently and nearly predictably. But the problem with failure for those who experience the imposter phenomenon is that there's the sense that when one fails, it validates your feelings of inferiority. It validates that we are not supposed to be here. And that's the problem with reacting to failure from an imposter phenomenon point of view. But from failure, we succeed, and that's the whole point of science. Remember that failure fine-tunes our successes. So, Alexander Fleming failed to clean up his workspace before he left his lab, left his sandwich there. And lo and behold, got penicillin. Dr. John Kellogg from Kellogg's, him and his partner failed to take corn off of a burner whilst having a chat to their friends, having a chat with their friends. And they decided to still use it. And now we've got cornflakes. And there are loads of examples of where people have failed and success has come out of it. Now, not all failures will result in success, but the idea behind science being trial and error is really important. Because if we fail, if we get to that point where we fail to prove our, or to disprove our hypothesis, for example, it sends us in a different, more finely tuned direction for our research. Step number 6. So we need to admit the gaps. There will always be somebody better at something than us, always. I am rubbish at some sports, honestly, and you know, there's so many people better than me, but there are things that I am better at than some people, and that's okay. And the feeling that we should always have the answer and always know best, it really adds pressure and it pushes into this phenomenon, this imposter phenomenon. But it's okay to say, you know what, I don't know, let's look it up together. As somebody working in clinical medicine, if a medical student or an intern asks me something and I don't know, I used to feel absolutely rubbish. And I thought, but I'm a doctor, I should know this. Until I realized, well, actually, this is an opportunity for me to learn too. And now I've just filled that gap. And instead of feeling inferior, I have now learned something and built my skills. So it's okay to say, you know what, I'm not actually sure how to do this. Can you teach me? And this is really important. This may be from somebody who is not at the same level as you are in your career or in your academic career, but perhaps they know how to use R really well. And you know, I have no idea. So I would ask them. Right, changing the perspective. So this is a really nice quote. So changing how we feel won't change how we think, but changing how we think will change how we feel. And this ties into the mindfulness of the whole mindfulness experience and being aware and being cognizant of these experiences that we are having. So instead of saying, well, you know what, these people in this room, they're far more qualified than I am. I'm just making an absolute fool of myself. Think about it. These people are more qualified than me. I can learn so much. And that's a really difficult thing sometimes to grasp, and it's very subtle. And often one's ego may stand in the way because this person, you might have a problem with them, they might be in a different field, and now they know more than you do in your own field, but that's okay. Let's learn, bridge the gaps. Right. See it and believe it. So it might sound strange, but part of the management of the imposter phenomenon is to sit and just go through your own achievements. It's sometimes okay to just have a look and say, you know what, jeepers, 2 years ago, I did that really well. I got the prize for XYZ. And it's okay to feel good. And it's okay to allow yourself to see that you have been successful. And these feelings of inferiority are not real. Or reality, rather. The feelings are real, but the situation, it's not reality. So there was work by Cuddy and her colleagues that popularized the so-called Superman pose, where it was then taken into Grey's Anatomy, and I just realized that I outed to the whole world that I watched Grey's Anatomy with my wife, and I don't know how I'll ever be able to live that down. But the idea was that adopting the Superman pose, that hands on your hips, chest out, proud pose, somehow had an actual physiological chemical response in the body, which yielded better outcomes in tasks. Fortunately, the findings haven't really been reproducible. There have been a couple of contradicting articles, but I think the idea is still there, because what has been found is that the Superman pose, the idea of the Superman pose, inspires confidence, and confidence, even though there aren't any biochemical changes, confidence itself has been shown to be effective in yielding better outcomes. Now, I'm not saying before you write any article, before you touch a scalpel, or before you stand like Superman, we can internalize this as well, and it's really important. Number 9, treat yourself. So it's not conceit to say, you know what, I did really well. I'm really proud of myself. I feel like that went really well. I think I presented well. I think I did so well at that Congress, or I wrote that introduction to my paper really well. And it's important to physically celebrate the win somehow. And this way you sort of mark it. Give yourself an afternoon off, go literally get a milkshake, binge watch a program, like I suppose Grey's Anatomy. Go for a hike, do something that you enjoy to physically reward yourself and celebrate this win. And then the last step is winging it. So unfortunately, a PhD, being enrolled in a PhD doesn't make a mastermind. And in fact, the further you go on in academia, the narrower the field becomes. But we've learned a number of skills along the way that we can utilize in various situations. So yes, if somebody asks us a question and we genuinely don't know, it's okay to say, you know what, I don't know. But if it's a situation where we can apply what we've learned and what we've brought through to the situation, and we can help people and answer questions in that way, not only will it assist the person who asked the question, but it will also give us the confidence to do it again and make us feel better. So now that we have an idea of these 10 steps and how we can approach managing the imposter phenomenon, how can we help others? So remember that many of our colleagues and our peers struggle with the imposter phenomenon. And it's okay to encourage one another. Often we feel that we're in this rat race where we're competing against one another. And that's one of those signs where you feel that you are not where you are academically compared where you should be compared to your peer or to your colleague. But I mean, it's not a race in the grand scheme of things, sort of all going through it together. So if your colleague published their paper first, say congratulations. They probably feel that they didn't deserve it anyway. So by us being proactive and assisting others in overcoming the imposter phenomenon, it will certainly come back as a win for us. So we have to give praise. And this is really important. And this is something I picked up while reviewing journal articles. I've noticed that often feedback is given in a way that's, yes, gets to the point, but it's not particularly useful. You can say that something wasn't up to standards, but by saying, you know what, I still like the way that you structured your introduction. I don't think it covered all the areas, but I really think your discussion in the article was well structured. So we can give constructive feedback and highlight the positives at the same time. So we can break the cycle, and we can foster young researchers to have good self-esteem. Because there's somebody who just graduated with their undergrad today. Maybe they're interested in research, but they've already started having these feelings of the imposter phenomenon coming out. This is how we can help them. So just to conclude the presentation part, imposter phenomenon is so common. It's everywhere in academia. And the more I've spoken to people, the more I've come to realize that it's rife. It's everywhere. And people don't talk about it. Or if we do, sort of just, it's a known thing, everybody feels that way, sort of get over it. But it can really be crippling. And I think that these 10 steps, with number 1 being the most important in identifying the signs of imposter phenomenon, I think we can really sort of get over it in a way that makes it more manageable. So to make this talk a little bit more personal, I can give an example. When I gave my initial talk last year on the imposter phenomenon, the day before I gave my presentation, I got a rejection letter for an article of mine from a journal. And I remember going into this imposter phenomenon spiral. So it was almost like I was running a race to see how many of those checkboxes I can tick. And honestly, going through these 10 steps the night before my presentation actually helped. It sort of assisted me personally to get through that. So I really hope that this talk has been useful and that people can feel like they've learned something from this. And I just want to say thank you for the opportunity. Yeah, and if there are any questions, please ask.
Thank you so much for your perspectives on this. I'm sitting here with pages and pages of notes and pinpointing where the imposter phenomenon has come out most strongly in my academic career. So this has really been very, very helpful for me. While I provide others also an opportunity to think of any questions or comments that they'd like to pose about this. I do have one little niggling question about your readings regarding the imposter phenomenon.
Yeah.
Do women experience it more than men? But I'm asking specifically because of what you said about the Superman pose, the power pose, or just the fake it till you make it.
Yeah,
do women
wing it.
do women really do they experience it more or get crippled by it more than what men do by any chance?
So from my reading, the majority of articles and research has been sort of focused and poised towards women. And I mean, I'm definitely not an expert, so I can't say with full conviction, but my personal feeling is that, you know, this might be sort of playing into, you know, typical or stereotypical gender roles again, and women may very well be more prone to experiencing this. But I'm not sure if the prevalence is definitively higher in one group versus the other.
I find it so interesting when you look at oh, just getting a little personal now. When you look at different, how genders would respond to job applications, for example, a woman might say, oh, no, I'm not good enough because I don't have this particular skill, but there might be more men who would say, well, let's give it a go. This has been my personal experience. I'm not sure whether it's everyone else's, which is also why I was wondering about whether women would be more critical of themselves and just avoid certain opportunities because we may feel that we are actually inferior. I find it a very interesting concept, and hopefully these steps would aid many women to know the signs and to manage IP better for men and women.
Unfortunately, it's sad that in 2022, women still feel this way, and that they, in many situations, are still made to feel this way. And that's probably why a lot of the research has been done around focusing on that gender in particular. But yeah, it really is a shame, and I think more research should be done. And this is potentially a nice opportunity to assess that, and how the different genders or potentially even cultures experience this and experience the way that they handle this and manage this, because I'm sure there are loads of differences.
Yeah.
And nuances that require nuanced inputs.
Absolutely, I totally agree. I see Prof. Heft has a comment regarding the gender comment as well. He says, my guess would be that men are just as prone, if not more so, but are less likely to admit to it when questioned.
Sure, yeah.
I see there's a hand up. Antoine, would you like to comment?
Hi, hello. So I'm one of the old surgeons here in Albert Lutuli. And I've got a lot of clinical experience. And I think what I find is that I can feel like Superman when it comes to surgery, but when it comes to publishing a paper and writing a paper, I feel like a crash student almost, you know. So I think, and I think what happens is not so much the imposter syndrome, but you kind of go towards the clinical work to fill your day instead of spending time in the academic. And yeah, it's just my experience.
Certainly, yeah. And you know, the problem is often we are not in an environment where people actively reward it if you come forward and say, look, these are my sort of shortfalls and I require assistance in this, because you're, again, in quotation marks, you're expected to know this by now, sort of thing, which makes it really difficult, I think, yeah.
I love what you said about changing the perception, though, you know, to say, well, you know what, this is a learning opportunity. This is an opportunity for me to grow. I will not feel inferior in this situation. I'm going to improve myself. That was just wonderful advice. Thanks. We still have an opportunity for more questions or comments.
Perhaps just on that, I can give an example. So personally, I'm a medical officer in neurology, and you know, you see it often with medical students, where if they come and they ask you a question, I think a lot of people feel pressured, and I see it in the interns, feel pressured to have to know the answer. But the number of times, you know, I don't know. There's so much that I don't know, and I'm happy that I don't know that. And that's a perspective change, and that we've sat together and we've looked things up together. And I think being okay with not knowing everything is probably one of the first steps in correcting that. Yeah.
Colleen, you have your hand up.
Yeah. Jean, I'd like to ask, in your reading, I have not read into this area at all. And from the discussion, it seems like there's a lot of research into how individuals should address the imposter syndrome. But how can a teacher or a mentor, has there been any research done where a teacher or a mentor can actually offer assistance to a group without them all coming and saying to them, to the teacher, oh, I've got imposter syndrome? I mean, I think imposter syndrome in medical education is often nurtured, because what you were just saying now, that interns feel as if they are meant to know everything. So I think that happens right through medical school. If you can't answer a question, often you're humiliated again at the bedside. So how would we now, if this is entrenched in somebody, in a group of people, has there been any research to show what exercises we could do? What are the things that we can tell people going forward on how to deal with imposter syndrome?
Sure. So a lot of, interestingly enough, a lot of what has been done on the imposter syndrome has been in the corporate world. And a lot of it is in the actuarial and business journals that I've come across. And what I find interesting from that aspect is a lot of the articles actually promote changing the idea that imposter phenomenon is bad. And again, as you said, they sort of recommending it and nurturing it, which is a dangerous thing to go to. Then to answer the question, I haven't read any studies where it came from like a teacher or supervisor down, but a golden thread throughout all of that was feedback and regular feedback. And the way that the feedback is structured is where it's key. So it's again in medical training or in science, as you say, it's often a given. It's almost a prerequisite that you have to have imposter phenomenon to go into it. And I think if we are cognizant of that already, we can schedule more regular feedback sessions with our students, or even provide these feedback sessions without prompting from the student. That's probably what I've seen in research, but no actual studies that I could find.
Another thing that I quite liked, and I guess it ties into what you just said, was the difference between management and cure of the imposter phenomenon. That the imposter phenomenon can actually be of benefit in some cases. And, you know, I've actually never thought of it that way. It's normally just this word that holds such heavy negative connotations. But you did mention a few of them, if I remember correctly. The empathy.
Yes,
guess
yes,
you're
and
constantly
interpersonal
aware.
skill. Yeah, that's it, yeah.
So, I mean, I guess curing it, managing in this case would be better than cure, considering there's this this opportunity for improvement by reassessing, by improving your interpersonal skills, your empathies, having more meaningful output or relationships. That's just been a mind change for me during the session, that there is an actual benefit to the imposter syndrome, imposter phenomenon. I'm going to call it imposter phenomenon from now on. Thank you very much. Right. So
if I may come in here again, I think what's coming out is Lufunda just threw out a term there, pathological confidence. And I think that is the, if it would be in the antithesis of imposter syndrome. But I think there is a line between being realistically humble and having imposter syndrome. And I think, Joanne, what you're describing about who you are is you are realistically humble. You don't know everything. It doesn't mean that you feel like you're an imposter. And I think that's what people should strive for, is don't think of yourself as having to know everything and come across as a pathologically confident person. But also the imposter syndrome is a little bit harsh for where you should be, and that is just realistically humble. We can't all do everything. We can't all be the best in every single situation.
Definitely, yeah.
You mentioned something interesting about failure, reacting to failure. And, you know, in this environment, failure, especially in research, happens all the time. Grant writing is especially, I mean, how often do you write a grant and it gets rejected, and you try again and you try again? I mean, I think last year I must have tried for 6 different grants and 0 for 6, and it really ate at me, you know, I'm not good enough, I'm never gonna get it. But there is this opportunity to learn, to grow. Why didn't I get it? How can I prove? How is the landscape changed? Can I build on this? And based on those rejections and those failures, you really do see yourself evolving, changing, improving even. And hopefully one day those grants would actually get funded. But the point here was the reaction to failure, noting that, you know, you can be crippling yourself by having this sort of inferiority complex about it. Focus on what you're learning. I know I've mentioned that in previous sessions, that's been one of the most important messages that has ever sunk into me in my life. So many things can go wrong, but there would be something to learn, an opportunity from that. And that really resonated for me from one of your steps about failure. And especially in this environment, especially when they are paper and grant rejections that are so very rife. Pick yourself
Well, I
up
think
something
failure is probably more common in science than than success. And how so we need to not only teach how to deal with success, but I think we need to start teaching and accepting how to deal with failure as well, because it is such a large it's such a large part of well, not just life, if I'm going to get philosophical now, but you know, we need to in science at least learn how to deal with it. Yeah.
Well, this has been so very important for me and my notes. And the session is recorded and will be available at on the UKZN YouTube website for a while, so that this information about the imposter phenomenon does not stay here, that it gets shared, and more people would be able to know how to identify and manage the imposter phenomenon. So thank you so much for your help, Vanya and Sinfanvian, and for your time today, and for your insight. And thank you everybody for your involvement in the discussion. This has been such an enlightening session. Next week, in the Tuesday PhD support group meetings, I think we'll have a final slot in our mental health block, and this will be hosted by the Sante Peer Mental Health Awareness Team. Some of you might have seen their posters around campus. They will be on site to discuss how these posters came about, the importance of them, and what we can do about promoting mental health awareness amongst our peers. So thank you everybody for your participation today. And thank you to our guest presenter for his. We'll see you next week for the next Tuesday PhD support group meeting. Thank you everybody. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody.